Everybody, happy holidays. Welcome to our final capital chat of 2024. That is super weird to say, but here we are, getting ready for the 2025 legislative session already. And so we're hoping today gives you guys some resources and some tools to get started on your advocacy work in 2025. But do please take some time off during the holidays and relax with friends and family before you get started on your advocacy. It's going to be a busy year. So welcome to our last capital chat. I think we've got our interpreter pinned. Hopefully you can see that. We have closed captioning option at the bottom. If you hit the button that says more, you can access the closed captioning. You can go ahead at any time and put your questions in the chat or your comments, and we'll get to them as we can. With that, I am going to turn it over to Amy Campbell. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Brooke Lovelace, Executive Director of the Developmental Disabilities Council. It does seem like it's our first time doing this year. So welcome, everybody. Go ahead, Amy. Is Amy with us?
Sorry, Brooke froze up on me. So is it my turn?
It is your turn.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. I am going to turn my video off, and I really apologize to everybody for doing that. Well, I'll try to keep it on as long as I can, but my internet is buffering for some reason. Before I start, we were going to just do a quick recap of the federal and state legislative or election results. And before I do that, there was some big news that came out this morning that we wanted to make sure that you saw. The state has issued their, as you all know, last couple of years in the legislature, there have been changes to the mental health and disability services regions. And there are, as you know, regions around the state that manage non-Medicaid services, including crisis services. They had asked for new administrative services organizations to run those. They had asked for people to apply to do that. And today, this morning, they awarded it to one statewide organization to run all of the regions, and that's the Iowa Primary Care Association. They are the federally qualified health centers around the state. And so some of you maybe know of them as community health centers. But we don't know much more other than the press release that came out today. So we will make sure we post that press release and information on it on our breaking news section of the website. But I wanted to make sure that everybody had heard that. And I don't know if anybody has any comments or want to talk about that at all before I move on, even though I know nothing more than that. Carlin and Brooke heard the same kids, so probably most people just that. So I'm sure that will be a topic of our conference moving forward here. So, Emily, do you want to move it to the next slide? It's not showing on my. Uh-oh, you're frozen.
We can hear you, Amy. Oh, we might have lost her.
Looks like we did.
We'll give her a second, see if she hops back on. If not, I can jump in. Oh, she was having technical difficulties.
Okay.
Oh, there she is.
She is.
Oh, I switched over to my phone hotspot, so let's hope if that works for you. I don't know, did you go through the other, um, was this the first
I,
slide?
it's still this, yeah, go
Okay.
for it.
Sorry, everyone, for this. I know every time I think I have some kind of technical difficulties, and I promise I'm going to fix it this time. But the state election results, we wanted to kind of go through those real quickly. As you can see, the House and the Senate have a supermajority, which means the Republicans control 2/3, at least 2/3 of the both chambers. So you can see that things aren't going to change a whole lot at the Capitol. In fact, they have even more of a majority, so they can lose a few votes and not really worry about something, whether it's going to pass. So 35 Republicans in the Senate and 67 in the House. Democrats have 15 in the Senate and 33 in the House. So pretty overwhelming majorities. There were some close races and recounts, but all of them were upheld in the end. So if you go to the next slide, you will notice that are going to be 7 new faces in the Senate and 16 in the House. And I listed some of the new senators and the new Republican or the new representatives. Those in red are Republicans, those in blue are Democrats. So you can kind of see where some of the new folks are coming from. Don't know a whole lot about many of them. And I think that's always good to kind of have an opportunity for all of the advocates as well as us, those of us at the Capitol, to really learn and get to know those new folks. So um, just wanted to give you that heads up. And then also we're still putting together our legislative guide, and I have now gotten some of the committee listings, but they're not all completed yet. We do have 2 new chairs for the HHS policy committee. So the ones that do not budget stuff, but the policy issues. Um, those are Senator Klimisch from up in the Decorah area. And so he's got those states kind of like or counties like Winneshiek and Clayton, up in that corner, northeast corner of the state. And then Representative Carter Nordman will take over in the House. He is kind of out in Panora, Dallas Center. I think he lives in Dallas Center now, so just outside the Metro Des Moines area. On the budget side, we still have Senator Costello from down in Southwest Iowa, and then Ann Meyer, who had chaired the Health and Human Services Policy Committee, is moving over to the budget side. So we're still waiting on hearing what the Democratic committee memberships are and then the full committee members. But we will put it on our website when we find out more information. And I'm going to turn it over to Carlin to talk about the federal election results.
So we are talking a little bit about Congress today, especially not just because of the election, but some issues that have arisen because of the how the makeup of Congress will be and the new president-elect coming in, or I should say re-elected president. And by the way, my name is Carlin Crow, and I'm the public policy manager with the Iowa DD Council. And I'm battling a sore throat today, so hopefully my voice is going to hold out. I was hoping Amy wasn't going to cut out and I would have to take over, because I'm hoping it's going to last. But House and Senate in congressional level is a little bit more evenly split than our own Iowa legislature, but still majority GOP. And with those results and the presidential election, we're expecting that there's going to be legislation coming down that will be broadly supported by the GOP and supportive of the president's initiatives. And as you know, here in Iowa, our members of Congress were all reelected, and we did not have senators who were up for election this cycle. That will come in 2 years, right, Amy?
Yes.
But all of our representatives to the House of Representatives were reelected. So things continue as normal for us as far as who we reach out to locally, reach out to from Iowa to members of Congress. And we are going to try and incorporate more news and action items for Congress in our upcoming Capitol chats, especially because of what we kind of see coming down the pike. And if you'll move to the next slide, I'll kind of give you an indication of what that might be. And it all has to do around Medicaid. So you probably heard that there's already talk about cuts to Medicaid for the incoming Congress and the incoming president. That was outlined in Project 2025, which was released before the election. And also some other conservative institutional reporting that is looking at ideas for how to save money in the federal government by looking at what can be cut in this area of our funding and budgeting. So Congress is already looking at these ideas, throwing out some ideas and getting some feedback, and some of it's public feedback. But it could have some very big implications for any of us who are affected by Medicaid and for our state and for also our state budget. So moving along, we thought we'd show you a little bit of a breakdown of the federal budget. So this is just to kind of give you a high-level overview of, because I know it's hard to read, and we're not going to go into detail at all, and it's a little bit complicated. Just where Medicaid fits into the budget. So you might have already heard too that the incoming administration has said, we think they're not going to touch Social Security or Medicare, which is in that mandatory kind of slice there on the outer edge. Social Security is on the top in the dark blue. The next blue down is Medicare, and then the one right after that is Medicaid. So that's to kind of point out that the next biggest chunk of funding that they could look at cutting is right there in front of us as Medicaid. Now, this is the mandatory spending of our the federal budget, and so this part of the budget usually, it isn't looked at every year. The discretionary funding is what Congress approves and appropriates every year, and that's what we are typically talking about. So mandatory spending is usually kind of set, and it's based on what the need is, what needs to be paid out from things like Social Security, what the needs are for Medicaid recipients, Medicare recipients, and so it's not in an allocation budget every year. But what is being considered is how that money is spent. So not so much the amounts, but how the laws are set up to spend that funding. And as we were putting together our presentation for today and actually thinking about what would be some good information for all of you as advocates, we're talking about doing a special webinar, something like we do with Capital Chat, and have it focused specifically on Medicare or Medicaid and what the implications are for the discussions that are happening now, so we can kind of all get ahead of the ideas that are being floated, and what we can do to be knowledgeable and speak out about them if we need to. So that, again, high level overview of the budget. If you move on to the next slide, we put in here some ideas that are being floated. These are not all of them, but if you look, a lot of them have implications for what would then happen to a state's budget. So something like Medicaid block grants, which is kind of the first idea that's been floated. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail because we'll do that when we do a special webinar. But block grants would mean that funding is set and specific every year based on your state. So whereas right now it's based more on need and what the needs of people who are receiving those programs need, this would switch it to a set amount, which means that a set amount coming from the federal government means that if the states want to continue what they're doing and even improve their services, they would have to spend more. So there's where implications for what a state spends in Medicaid would be affected immediately. And kind of back to the federal budget too, and how states break it up. Medicaid, most states are spending Medicaid dollars from the federal government. It's usually about 70% versus 30% is coming from our own state budget. It differs by state. Again, and it differs by need too, but that's pretty much the way that it breaks down. So some of the other ideas that are being floated are to put lifetime caps, change the percentage that goes to states, Medicaid work requirements, which is nothing new. We've heard this. We hear this at the state level too, as recently as a couple sessions ago, right, Amy? That work requirements were floated as an idea. What's covered, separating people into groups of sick people versus healthy people, and coverage groups, making that different, which usually amounts to more cost for people who are the sickest, and some other ways to not help additional people get into Medicaid. And kind of the sad part about all these ideas is nothing says that we're going to improve quality of care for people in Medicaid, or make sure everybody's covered, or make sure their needs are met. It's just all about the money and the dollars amount. So that's where our work and our stories and your stories are going to become more important as you talk to your, hopefully, or email your members of Congress, and also our state legislators, because it's going to impact our state budget. And even if what is being proposed at the federal level doesn't happen right away, our state budget is still going to be affected. And I think that might be what we're talking about next.
Yes, and I wanted to mention before, you can go ahead and move it forward, but Medicaid work requirements will be a discussion this session. I know one senator is pushing for that. Looking at the change in the administration, the reason the state did not do that before is that the Biden administration was not going to allow a waiver to do the work requirements. So there is a thought process that with the new administration, they may allow that. So I think that is something I know that will be coming up this year, whether it moves forward or not, I don't know. Also, when you talk about block grants, that means the state decides how to spend the Medicaid dollars with very few strings attached with the federal. And a lot of the things that are required at the state level make sure that people have access to the full range of services. So we will definitely be covering that more in detail as we and it'll evolve as the new administration takes over and the new Congress is seated. I do want to mention that we do have some challenges at the state level, irregardless of what's going on out at the federal level. And just yesterday, the revenue estimating conference, which looks at how much money the state takes in revenues, and then kind of estimates it so that we can, our new legislature can base the budget around how much money is coming in. So they're allowed to spend 99% of the revenues we're bringing in. The rest gets saved for a rainy day. But as you probably have read, there's been a lot of tax cuts that have gone into place, income tax cuts over the last several years that the legislature has passed, and we're starting to see the impact of that. So Iowans are paying less in income taxes, but that means we have less to spend. So our current budget, so the fiscal year that we're in now, which will end on June 30th, 2025, that budget is $8.9 billion, so just shy of $9 billion. The problem is we've had a drop of $1 billion in revenues, so we're only going to estimate it to take in 8.6 billion, or have that eligible to spend. It's 8.7 that we're taking in, but 99% of that is 8.6 billion. So we have a current budget that is $300 million short of the revenues we're taking in. So we don't have enough to keep everything exactly the same as it is in the budget now. On top of that, because of the enhanced match that we had more federal dollars coming into Medicaid than normal because of the public health emergency, COVID emergency. So with that going away, we have a $218 million shortfall in Medicaid. Just to keep everything the same, not enact the home project, not do any additional services, just to keep everything exactly the same, we're $218 million short. Then I also wanted to mention that the educational savings program, so that's the private school vouchers program, they underestimated the amount that they were being used last year. And this next year, when the income caps are removed and anybody in the state, no matter what your income is, will be eligible for those voucher programs, they're estimating that that's going to grow by another $130 million. So as you can see, just to keep everything exactly the same, we're about $600 million short. That means cuts, or we do have a lot of money set aside in savings. So we have, I just wrote the numbers down since it was just yesterday, but we have a $2 billion surplus going into the year. So $200 billion of last year's revenues won't be spent. We have about $1 billion in savings. And then we have 3.7 billion in a taxpayer relief fund that's to go to taxpayer relief. So you're talking about $6 billion in extra money sitting there, but it's one-time funds. So usually legislators don't like to use one-time funds for ongoing programs. So there is some money to draw from. Whether or not they will do that is a question of what the legislature is going to do. And that's a question we'll all be watching the answer to, because we don't know if they're going to cut services, if they're going to use some of those reserves. They want to cut property taxes this year, so that's another challenge. So you can see that we have some issues with the budget this year that legislators will have to look at. And I think that will impact, and it'll double the pain if the federal government decides to make some cuts too. So I'll go on to the next slide. We also wanted to let you know that there is kind of jumping over. I'll pause after this if there were questions on Medicaid too, but I wanted to make sure everybody knew that we had posted on some of our social media. We have it up on our website, sent out an email about this, but we have on our Take Action site a federal action that you can take if you are concerned about, interested in competitive integrated employment. There is a proposed rule that the U.S. Department of Labor has put together, and it would end the certificates that they issue that allow some employers to pay workers with disabilities below minimum wage. Those are called 14C certificates because it's based on Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act. But the important thing is it would gradually eliminate those certificates by phasing them out over 3 years. So The people that are in those programs would be able to transition out to full pay, at least minimum wage paid jobs, or give the companies time to increase those salaries over 3 years, and then they would end the issuance of new ones. On our website, you can link to see who those are in Iowa. There's 5 of them currently that have been issued those certificates. So that it would affect some people in Iowa. There's not as many as there are in other states in Iowa. We've done a little bit better job of trying to get individuals into integrated employment here. Thanks to a lot
Amy,
of people on the call.
Patty has her hand up. She's had it for a while. Maybe we could go to her real quick.
Sorry, that was an error.
Oh, okay. Does anybody have any comments or questions about this or the Medicaid stuff before we move on?
Amy, this is Cheryl Jones, and I put it in the chat too. I lived through times when there were Medicaid caps and kids with, with some of these really significant issues had bills by $1 million by the time when they're a year old. You put caps on this for children, it's absolutely devastating. And so I mean, that message has gotten to be, it's one thing to be capped if you're 80. It's another thing to be capped if you're 1 month or 2 months old with a chronic condition that's going to require issues forever. So I think that's certainly a message for those of us who work with children with chronic issues, developmental disabilities, kids with autism are going to require ongoing services. And so, God, this just is, I don't want to go back to those days.
Yep, I hear that. And I think a lot of people on the call I know have had concerns about children in the system, making sure the services to children are not cut, because that adds to the cost later on in their lives. I'm also looking, Chad had asked, where can advocates or parents be where it most matters? DHS committees, legislative session. Yeah, I think we've had some great parent advocates at the Capitol, especially during the AEA changes and discussions. I think it's important that parents talk to their legislators if there's an opportunity when the federal congressmen, women are out and about talking to them. But we're going to make sure, Carlin and I need to make sure we constantly are giving you guys opportunities and ideas to take action that are going to be impactful to legislators. It's hard when you're dealing in rumors, which is kind of what we're dealing with now. We don't really know the concrete facts of where things are going to move.
I put this one in the chat too. I said work requirements in a way I get, but what about the ones that cannot work? Are they still going to get coverage?
Yeah, Dakota, thank you for bringing that up. I was just reading it when you said that. There were, Harlan and Brooke, do you remember? There were some
There were
there was
some
a
exceptions,
people to have out.
yeah,
Yeah. There
at
were
least in
some,
the state level.
I think what you have problems with in other states are people don't report their work, and work can also include education. So if you're bettering yourself, helping, advance your career, people that have specialized childcare needs, there's other outs for that, that count toward the work requirement. Like if you're caring for a child with a disability or a child that's under the age of 5, so under the school age. I know they didn't have an exception for those caring for like a parent that has Alzheimer's or dementia. I know that was an exception they talked about. There were some exceptions. But I think where other states like Indiana and I think it's Louisiana that are the two kind of held out as models for the program, they found that people just didn't comply with the reporting requirements. So they might have still been eligible, but they got kicked off because they didn't submit their report each year. So that's the kind of, it's not even necessarily that people are falling off because they're not working. They're falling off because they're not reporting their work.
Deb put in the chat that there doesn't seem to be any public legislative forums anymore, and how can we find out more? And those will start up again once the legislative session starts up, and Amy does a great job of tracking those, and we put them in our calendar. So we'll point those out more too. Also wanted to suggest if any of you would like to host a town hall meeting or forum with your local legislators, or your, if you're a member of kind of an affinity group, like a parent with special needs kids, and you would like to host a town hall meeting, we have grants to help you do that. So the more of you that get together that want to, bring those comments forward to your legislative representatives, and also have them make comment about what they could do for your issues, the better. So that's one way too of getting your story told directly, and in a group too. And Amy put the link in the chat.
Yeah, I put the link in the chat, but yes, and they don't hold many public forums especially during election years when they're all out doing election related activities. And we don't really want to post any kind of election, like their campaign stuff. So last year, I think we tracked over 400 public forums. Not everybody has them, but also if they're not having them in your area, I think it's a good opportunity for you to have one for them. It doesn't have to be too hard, and the DD Council can help with that. So I think we can go on to the next slide. Because we wanted to have a little bit of an opportunity to talk about the DD Council's policy goals. And I'm going to turn it back over to Carlin if she still has a voice, and kind of talk about what their goals are. And then we can open up the link to where you can see the actual agenda online.
Thanks, Amy. And yeah, we wanted to give everybody a heads up on our priorities for this coming legislative session. We just released them and posted them this past week, and they're getting some attention already about them. But we're not usually in a position where people are waiting, anxiously waiting for us to announce our priorities. But it's good to see that what we're talking about is getting some traction. And so these are the four overarching issue areas, I should say, that we're focusing on again and working on again, not too different from what we focused on last year. But number one being employment, and interesting that we're talking about work requirements when one of the issues and one of the perceptions that we want to change about a lot of people who must be on Medicaid, because that's their only option, is that many of them want to work more, make more money, get married, but they can't because there are limitations to income, limitations to assets, and other barriers that are holding people back from being fully employed, or at least employed, and making the kind of living that would allow them to live independently of public assistance. So focusing on employment is going to be our main priority this year. And one of the reasons is because this issue came up last year and it got a lot of traction, and it could get bipartisan support. It's a matter of what the majority party wants to look at as far as employment supports that could be put in for people with disabilities, and how that would affect Medicaid, costs. So that's some more details that we'll get into too, and some data that we'll talk about later. But moving on, I want to give these overarching areas, and then we'll look at the policies in detail and give you a little bit more about what we're talking about. So number one, employment. Number two, education. And the focus is just making sure that all of our students in Iowa are getting the supports they need in school, and that they're in an inclusive learning environment and the least restrictive environment that they can learn adequately in, and are thriving there, and that their families are happy with where their student is at and the education that they're getting. And some of that is looking at how IEPs are administered. And so we want to keep an eye on that because of the legislation that passed last year regarding AEAs, and where parents' role is falling into that. I know there's some talk in the chat about students in schools and the rights of parents. And so we will be monitoring that a lot, and talking to legislators about what we're hearing is happening this year as a result of legislation that passed last year. Number three is a community living and healthcare issues that focus on, again, making sure people have the supports and the healthcare that they need to live in the community of their choosing, and are supported with the assistance that they need, whether that's through, again, Medicaid or other supports that community providers provide for them. And that this includes looking at the direct support professional workforce and how we can help make sure that there are enough providers to provide the support that people need. And number four is accessible voting for everyone, and particularly people with disabilities who may need more accessible ways to make sure that they can participate and have their voice heard through their vote. We'll let you take a look here. We'll move over to what our policies look like in print, and then show you the more details about them. We are in our employment section, we've listed a lot of, I don't want to call them ideas, but priorities in a way that hopefully will give lawmakers some ideas of what changes could be made to reduce those barriers that we've talked about. So in each section, we also added a rationale of, why this goal is necessary, what we're hearing as far as what those barriers are, and, whether it's hearing from advocates, employers also, about things that need to change so that we can reach that goal of having, in this case, more people with disabilities holding competitive jobs. And a lot of what the principles in this goal focus on is employment first principles, which we've talked about before, which lead to competitive integrative employment. And, basically focusing on any type of publicly funded program that's looking at assisting people with disabilities and getting employment and maintaining and getting the employment they need. It focuses on competitive integrative employment. So it's in the community, and it's like a job that anybody else would get. You're paying above minimum wage and avoiding discrimination in the workplace. And moving on to some of those specific barriers we talked about as far as Medicaid limits, with that regard income and assets, and what we hear from our advocates, the people we work with, that there's some people who are gainfully employed, they have private insurance, but they still can't get the support they need to get to work, so they must use Medicaid. And that's where they're then required to not have as much income as they could be making so that they can get that support to get to work. So in some cases, it's a very obvious catch-22. For others, it's changing jobs, and for others, it's some people who become disabled because of their condition have to cut back on their hours, and they're again not able to reach their full potential even as a part-time employee because those barriers and limits kick in. So there's a lot of ways that these barriers could be addressed. We've listed things like tax incentives, more tax incentives for employers. There are tax incentives right now, but the barrier there is that they're complicated and hard to report. So employers don't usually want to go to the trouble. And so there's, ways of looking at what's happening at the other end as far as what employers could be, what could make it easier for employers to employ more people with disabilities into their workforces. And I think, the other thing that we want to do is educate the lawmakers and also advocates on these issues. And so we're trying to be very intentional about not always using language that everybody else doesn't understand, like competitive integrative employment. It's a common word. We use it in our worlds here a lot, and making sure legislators understand what that is, lawmakers as well as advocates, and things like employment first. So we're trying to be cognizant of that, not use a lot of acronyms. If you hear us doing that and you don't understand, please reach out and let us know ways that we can help educate you and your legislators better. Moving on, let's talk about education. And we, in our legislative priorities here too, we provide stories from our advocates. These advocates will be also talking to lawmakers when we introduce our priorities to them. And, throughout session, we expect them to be at the Capitol as kind of the voice for some of our issues too. And would like any of you who would like to play that kind of role too, to please reach out to us, because we want to help support you in telling your stories and talking to your legislators also. So as mentioned earlier, in our education goal, we really want to look at what the legislation that came down last year regarding AEAs and how that could be affecting classrooms and students. The AEA task force that was created because of last year's bill just met recently, and they acknowledged that it's really going to take a little while to find out what the implications or the consequences of the bill are having in schools, and especially since it's a kind of a tiered implementation approach. And what we want to head off is any problems that are happening right away as a result. So if students aren't getting their needs met, or parents are seeing difficulties because of what happened, we want to hear from you so that we can lift those stories up to legislators also, and also help you tell your story to them. So whether it's regarding IEPs or lack of services, or where funding comes from and goes, please let us know. What we hear both from school systems and from parents is that a lot of students aren't getting the services that they need, and a lot of it is because of lack of funding at the local level in the school systems. So the fact that we're looking at, again, potentially cutting funding for public schools is not going to be a help to students with disabilities at all, even though they are supposedly covered under IDEA and supposedly through their IEP to get what they need. And we know that sometimes that's not happening. So again, we want to hear more so that we can make sure that we're looking at these issues for the future. Another issue that falls under this category that we've been working on too is transition programs, and to make sure that places like voc rehab are funded adequately so they can help students move into employment or whatever their next step in life is going to be after high school as they make that transition. One of those programs is the Comprehensive Transition and Secondary Education Program that we've called CTP. Again, this is one of those terms that's used globally, nationally, and we have to help define it for ourselves as well as everyone else. But these are programs that could help students with intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, developmental disabilities get a secondary education that helps move them to employment. And those programs are out there, but they're hard to access, and there's a lack of assistance for families who want to send their students through these programs. So they have a lot of success in getting students employed and young adults, I should say, and living in the community. And so we're going to bring attention again to those and their potential and how that could, what the legislature could do to potentially have more of those available, as well as additional funding for the supports that Voc Rehab provides for students. And move on to the next one, and we'll take again questions at the end. Moving on to community living. A lot of what we talk about in this goal is has to do with funding and funding for Medicaid, funding for waivers, funding that could help there be more or better paid direct support professionals in the community to support individuals who are living independently and need those supports at home. And the supports would be into raising rates that providers then use to pay wages to these individuals. And this has been a topic that we focus on every year. We make small gains maybe every year, but it's still not enough. And we still know that there are not enough DSPs out there, and they're not getting paid what they should, and community providers as a result are losing money also. So with the more support we can help with that also helps individuals with disabilities live in the community of their choice. We are looking really closely at what Iowa Health and Human Services is putting together for the Home Project, and this is the Hope and Opportunity in Many Environments program that is our community-based and home-based services that, again, support waivers. And we know that the waiver program is under revision, and we're awaiting what the final model is going to look like, and want to make sure again that funding is appropriate for the needs of the disability community, whatever that model might be, that the funding is there to support the needs of the community. And as we mentioned earlier, because of federal budgets and what we're looking at Medicaid, that might not be easy to talk about this year. But we will continue to talk about it, and we will continue to talk about waiver waiting lists no matter what the waiver program looks like, because that is a priority every year. I'm going to move on to the last one so we can make sure we get everything in here. We always talk about making sure that voting is accessible to people with disabilities. A lot of the calls to action have relate to some changes that have been made in recent years that could potentially be reversed to help people make sure that they can get their vote in and get their vote in time if they're using early voting or mail-in voting. And I know that we did a lot of voter outreach this summer and heard from a lot of people that said, you know, it was a little bit harder for them to get their early ballot in because of turnaround times. You know, it's mailed out and you have to return it very quickly so that you make sure it gets counted. So some of those lengths of time for return for absentee ballots, as well as early voting opportunities, you know, where there's lots of waiting long lines for waiting to get to do early voting this year, which kind of decreased people's ability to vote, especially if you are disabled. So looking at those changes again, and maybe ways that we can again hopefully make voting accessible for everyone. And we know this is a priority for our state too. It's just kind of working out the details, and sometimes it's hard to agree on what the best details are for everyone. So that kind of is, again, high level overview. We want you to read through these. We want you to tell us your thoughts and how we can best represent you, and also how we can help you tell your story to legislators. We have Capitol Days. We would love for you to bring a group to the Capitol. Let us help you. Talk to your legislators at the Capitol, make that visit, and any other way that we can help support you in achieving, these aren't just our policy priorities. These are the priorities of you all from what we hear from all of you. So our job is to listen to you first and then communicate what you tell us back to the people who can help make change and help you communicate those changes that you want to see too. So we want to hear more ways that we can help you do that. And please feel free to reach out. I think Amy is going to close us out here, and we will take questions too.
Sorry, apparently I was muted. While Emily puts the last slide up with the dates on it, I just wanted to also answer what a couple people questioned about Liz Matney's position. She is now consulting with organizations on systems change type of things. But I know that they've got the job, it's out now, so people are applying for it. I think Kelly Garcia is kind of taking over a lot of what Liz did until they find somebody else, and then she had 2 deputies that I know are quite involved. So but she is now consulting to organizations, so I would assume you'll probably see her in there and around. Also, we did post in the chat a couple times the link to the public policy agenda. It is also on the DD Council website. And I don't see the last slide up. Emily, are you able to put it up?
It's up, Amy.
Oh, it's not on my screen. Okay. As long as you can see it. Add that to the list of technical problems we have. And Dakota, we'll come, let's go to Dakota first. He's had his hand up.
Just one question I had was about the home waiver redesign. Uh, have you guys talked about like how they are set up for people in wheelchairs? Not just the building entrance, but the how the kitchen is set up, how the laundry room is set up, how like those living spaces are, because I've heard a lot more that okay, it is handicap accessible because you can get into the house, but that's not really handicap accessible. I mean, it is, but then once you get in there, then it's not handicap accessible for you to live. So that was kind of one of my questions. I haven't been to many of those. Um, so that's just kind of my question if that isn't on the table, if it could be before it's official.
Dakota, yeah, I know you're talking about accessibility requirements, and there's another advocate amongst us who is working on something very specific in this issue about ADA and accessibility. And I would love to get you two connected because, this is federal law that's going to be hard to change. But people have talked about opening up the ADA again and updating it because it's been a while, and making some of these changes that you all are bringing up that need to be made. So let's talk about that. That's different than the home project that we're talking about, but your point is well taken, and we can be talking about that too as we talk about federal policy.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I saw Chad put in the chat too about teaching disability history and rights in school. And that has been introduced. It was last year, a couple years ago, by Representative Josh Turek. It's something that, again, it's going to take a while, but it's a great idea. And just because it's not on our priority agenda does not mean that's not something that we would definitely support and want to try and push. So it comes up, and in fact, we just talked about it in another meeting recently, that yes, we need to be focusing on that. If it can't be done through, legislation, including it in curriculum, which is hard to do, hard to change, providing that opportunity in other ways. Disability Rights Iowa has a curriculum on it. And we talk about it, but we don't really have a curriculum. So it's a great idea. And thank you for bringing it up again. Get it back on our radar.
I got my hand up. Sorry.
Okay.
I-
Go ahead, Chad.
I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand on the thing, so sorry. So I'm glad you acknowledged that, Carolyn, because to me, as a parent who has been intimately involved, I mean, I've been off work since 2019, trying to mitigate, all the issues with the school, the state, and of course, how to get back to work, which I'm now going to college. And I feel like the state really should support that because that is a path that could really help parents live a decent life for their kids, right? I mean, I think in the next 3 years, it's projected that almost 70% of the workforce, that's probably wrong, is going to need some kind of educational degree. So that's something I wanted to say. And then the Civil Rights Commission here in Iowa, I've went through them a few times with daycares. Daycares just flat out they got disabilities, we don't want to take them, right? And I think that flies in the face of ADA law. I think they have to give them a shot. They have to try. They can't just assume that they're unmanageable. And I've took it all the way to the ombudsman to get clarification on why it's such an issue. And it boils down to the state don't feel like they have any obligation to pursue these claims, whether they're justified or not. And instead, they'll just issue parents a right to sue letter, which again is another systemic issue given the fact that most parents raising these kids, especially single ones, are on the lower side of the economic scale. So that is more of a systemic issue, in my opinion, because we can't afford these lawyers to get these done. And without state intervention, or at least a civil rights commission in place to, pursue those, I don't know how we're ever gonna make it.
Good points.
So I know we're over now, but and it's funny that what I'm about to say, since I've always struggled to keep within our hour, but I'll move to Ann here in a second. I just wanted anybody that needs to hop off to note that we're moving to every other week capital chats during the session, and they'll be shorter. So noon to 12:30, but more frequent. And so those are the dates we have, and we will have those up and by the first of the year to get you, if you want to sign up for those individually or all together. We hope that having kind of a quicker update, we won't have so much to go over each time. So I'll move it over to Ann.
Yeah, I put it in the chat. I was just going to ask Chad to maybe reach out to me. I would like to talk more with you about that. And I think I can connect you with some people that could help fully. I put my address in the chat.
Well, I know.
Thanks, Anne. Glad you
Thank-
were on today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I know we're going to lose our ASL interpreter, and I really appreciate her being on, so that the recordings of this can be seen by others too. Are there any other comments before we close up? I'll let Carlin kind of wrap.
Real quick, when this shuts down, will we have access to the messages? Like, so,
I don't think so.
Oh,
Is
you
it-
mean the chat?
yeah, just so I can get feedback. So there's Ann Crotty. Okay,
Yeah.
I got that. But
Save the
sometimes
chat.
I don't know. Emily, do you know if it has the chat?
Typically the recording does not include it, but if there is specific information that you would like us to pull from the chat, we can do that.
Okay, that's fine. I was just checking because I know in the past I've wanted to go back and kind of look at some of the things were there. I know I missed some contact information and things like that. So if that's a possibility, I think that would be awesome.
You can
Yeah,
also,
you can save the chat. I'm just trying to figure out how to do it so I can tell you.
The top.
yeah,
There it
you-
is. I see it.
The three dots.
Yeah, the 3 dots. There you go.
Yeah. There you
Yeah,
go.
I'll give you a minute to do that. Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out, and hopefully anybody else who needs it can do it too. And thanks everybody for joining today. We forgot to tell you it was Red Sweater Day when we we were all here in red sweaters today. Happy holidays to all of you who are celebrating, and we'll see you in 2025. And hopefully you're ready with your advocacy story and ready to advocate. So
It's
thanks for
do or
joining
die.
today.
It's do or die.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Amy.